I want us to explore the boundaries of what we think is our reality. And we're going to talk about the macrocosm, the limits to largeness. That the great discovery of 20th century science is that our universe is finite, not infinite. And we're also going to go the other way. We're going to talk about the microcosm, the limits to smallness. And that's such a big shock, some of the early physicists that realized that committed suicide. The implications of the limits to smallness is staggering in its implications for our understanding of our reality. And we're going to talk about something you may never have explored, and that's the metacosm. That's what's going on beyond the limits of our immediate perceptions of our reality. And so that's where we're going, the boundaries of our reality. Now, I'm going to make some diagrams here, and I want us to adopt a convention that moving to the right is larger. And we're going from small to large when we go from left to right in this diagram. And I'm going to position ourselves, the reach of man. I'm going to indulge in assuming the classic Vitruvian Man of Leonardo da Vinci, just to represent our anthropic reach. And we as people, how far can we reach? And the direction I'm going to start is the direction of largeness. So we're going to move looking at what's larger than ourselves, and I'm going to collectivize that under a topic I'm going to call the macrocosm, that which is larger than us. And that leads us into the fields of study called astronomy and astrophysics. And I don't want to get into a whole tutorial on all of that, but I want to lift a few insights that comes from studies in those areas. And so the first thing I want us to be sensitive to is the area of thermal decay. Now, heat, we all know that heat always flows from hot bodies to cold bodies. That's just an observation that leads to the first law of thermodynamics, in fact, several of the laws of thermodynamics. And if the universe was infinitely old, then the temperature throughout the universe would be uniform. The fact that it's not uniform is proof that it's not infinitely old. It's cooling down, in effect. So it's not infinitely old. So there's a whole bunch of ways to approach this. I'll use this simplest one to start with, that the universe had a beginning. And even scientists which argue about other subjects tend to agree about the singularity that started it all. It hasn't been around forever. It had a beginning. And that's what leads to these conjectures that we call the Big Bang theories, okay? And it's also destined for an ending thermographically. So we have the Big Bang. That's the explanation of science. First there was absolutely nothing, and then it exploded. Now if you think that's logical and can stand on its own, you've got some other things to probably think about. But from the Big Bang, from the singularity, as they would call it, from that to the end, it ultimately has a heat death, because there will be a time, if nothing else changes, that the universe will be at a uniform temperature, no more work can be done, it ends in effect. And so we find ourselves thermographically within two limits already. And so, but along comes a guy by the name of Einstein that really opened up a whole new understanding of the world. In 1905, he formulated what's called his special theory of relativity, that length, mass, and velocity and time are all relative to the observers. But that led to a generalization of that, called his general theory of relativity in 1915, that there's no distinction between time and space. Another way of saying the same thing is he realized, as he was grappling with the properties of reality, that we live in more than three dimensions. We all know length, width, and height. We all experience what's called Euclidean geometry, a three-dimensional world. Einstein realized there's actually a fourth, and that fourth is what we call time. And it was his understanding of a four-dimensional universe that led to a whole revolution in thinking. And that is no longer just a theory. It's been confirmed 14 different ways to 19 different decimals. It's at this point, a real platform of understanding. It took about 60 years for it to be applied to physics, by the way, but that's where it had its big start. So we've just moved in our discussion beyond Euclid. Most of us that have been in school, whether we realized it or not, were taught what's called Euclidean geometry. That's a geometry that's limited to three dimensions, okay? But the most important lecture in mathematics was actually given in 1854 in June of 1854, George Riemann's metric tensors. And it took 60 years for that mathematics that he there announced to be applied physically. And it's interesting that Einstein himself went to his grave frustrated over his inability to reconcile other issues, which since have been subsequently have yielded by simply applying his insights. Einstein solved the theory of relativity by adding a dimension, and everything became clear. So he went to a four-dimensional space. And he died frustrated because there were other frontiers he could not resolve. If he had just done the same thing again, gone from not 4 but to 5 or 6, they would have yielded, and that subsequently happened. And in 1915, we have his four-dimensional space-time announcement. In 1953, Kaluza and Klein together went beyond 4 dimensions and reconciled light and supergravity to the equation. When you get to 1963, two guys, Yang and Mills, developed fields that reconciled electromagnetic and both nuclear forces, the weak and strong nuclear forces. So by simply adding dimensions, these imponderable things suddenly yielded to understanding and clarity. And so on it goes. And from 1984 onward, most people that are in this field of study have come to the conclusion that there are at least 10 dimensions, not just the 3 or 4 that we're familiar with, the superstrings and so forth. The current thinking is that our universe consists of one-dimensional superstrings that are vibrating in 10 dimensions. We're going to talk more about that later, but I want you to understand that when you have more than 3 dimensions, we typically call those hyperspaces, just a fancy word for spaces of more than 3 dimensions.